It's a book revered by millions of faithful believers. Today, the Bible is still a source of fascination. So many mysteries surround biblical episodes full of legendary figures and extraordinary phenomena.
Just like that, the miracle happened. Loaves and fish multiplied.
No scientist has ever succeeded in reproducing an imprint like this one on the shroud.
In order to unlock the deepest secrets of the Holy Book, we must explore its sacred sites, from Jerusalem to Rome, from Turin to the Sea of Galilee. A journey to rediscover the essential texts and the epic tales that make up the Bible.
This is what it is, the presence of God here on the mountain.
This is the best place, probably in the world, to see the ministry of Jesus.
An extraordinary saga in mythical places with breathtaking landscapes. Based on texts found in the Bible itself, and thanks to the work of archaeologists, researchers, and religious believers, the most famous biblical characters spring to life. On these holy sites, the mysteries still surrounding them will be revealed. Of all the kings in the Old Testament, the most legendary is Solomon.
He's the wiser, he has many wives than anybody else. He built everything, he has international connection. He's presented as the head of a huge empire.
His exemplary reputation has come down through the centuries. The third king of Israel, he was both powerful and just. The three religions of the book revere him. The Jews because he built the first temple in Jerusalem, a symbol of the union of all the Hebrews. The Christians admire him because, according to the Gospels, he was an ancestor of Jesus. The Muslims consider him a prophet, named Suleiman.
Solomon is described as one of the founders of the dynasty.
Immensely rich, Solomon made his fortune in the exploitation of copper mines and lucrative trading, especially with the powerful Queen of Sheba. Stunningly beautiful, she married Solomon during her visit to Jerusalem.
But the question is, what is reality behind it?
Solomon reigned over Israel 3,000 years ago. Finding evidence of his existence and the power of his reign is a real challenge for archaeologists.
You can take a piece of that and date it.
We don't have many remains from that time.
Recent discoveries have finally lifted the veil on certain mysteries that have surrounded Solomon until now.
You can say that we are in King Solomon's mind.
Thanks to the most advanced technologies, archaeologists have been able to bring back to life the reign of Solomon, whose greatness until now was described only in the Bible.
What the Bible is telling us, we can now see physically in archaeology.
This was a big surprise, because it changed everything we thought we know about King Solomon.
If Solomon really existed, was he as rich and powerful as the Bible describes him? Did he found one of the most prestigious dynasties of all time? Jerusalem holds a central position in the story of Solomon. It was the capital of the Kingdom of Israel when he ascended the throne in 970 BCE. A kingdom that Solomon inherited from his father, the no less legendary King David.
And Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established.
The Bible recounts that David was only a simple shepherd when he killed the famous Goliath with his slingshot. This feat covered him in glory, and he ended up seizing power. Still, according to the biblical story, he managed by force to unite the northern and southern tribes of Israel into a single kingdom.
David is a killer. And all the time people are killed and he's conquering. But look, if you compare from literary point of view, the stories about David and the stories about Solomon, these are two different worlds.
Solomon would not mark his reign by blood and war like his father David, but, on the contrary, by his wisdom.
King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth.
According to the Bible, God appeared to Solomon in a dream and offered him whatever he asked of him. Solomon didn't ask for wealth, but wisdom. God granted him both. This gift of wisdom manifested itself very quickly during the famous Judgment of Solomon. Two women were both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. Solomon employed a ruse to decide between them and ordered that the infant be cut in half. One of the women was distressed by the idea, the other accepted the deal. It was then easy for Solomon to identify the true mother. Thus began the reign of Solomon 3,000 years ago. The wisest of kings would bring peace and prosperity to his kingdom from his capital, Jerusalem. But what did the city he inherited look like? Archaeologists, like Yuval Gadol, are still looking for signs of it.
We are in the ancient city of Jerusalem. The fact that Jerusalem was built so many times makes this place fascinating. If it wasn't so important, then it wasn't a real hunt for us as archaeologists to try and figure out the reality of the 10th century BC.
The excavations are concentrated just outside the southern wall of the current Old City, in a district called the City of David. Why did they choose Jerusalem as the capital in this arid region? To find out, we follow Yuval Gadol into the bowels of the earth.
This is the source of Jerusalem. This is the reason why Jerusalem became Jerusalem. It's also important to drink, but it's also a very symbolic place. Water coming out of the earth, life coming out of the earth.
This spring, protected by a vast system of tunnels, would make it possible to supply water to a rapidly growing city.
So you understand how important this place was for the city. The water was their political kind of source of power for the kings of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem had a major asset for becoming an important capital: unlimited access to drinking water. The city was therefore built near this spring. Was it during the time of King Solomon that this city, clinging to a rocky spur, became the resplendent capital described in the Bible?
The big question is, when is Jerusalem expanding out of the area of the spring? So we want to find the moments that Jerusalem is becoming a large city, a city that is ruling over a kingdom.
Was it during the reign of Solomon in the 10th century BCE that Jerusalem started to grow?
There were kings ruling from here. Were they called David and Shlomo? Probably. But were they as great as some of the biblical script describes them? Probably not.
There are so few traces of the time of David and his son Solomon that some archaeologists had begun to doubt their historical existence. The only written source that mentioned them until recently was the Bible, but there was no other evidence of their existence. Our investigation into the sovereigns of Israel, as told in the Book of Kings, continues at the prestigious Israel Museum, where Pirshia Ayal, the curator of antiquities, shows us a coin that has put an end to the mystery.
We are in front of the Tel Dan stele, which was found in Tel Dan in the north of Israel.
In 1993, during excavations, archaeologists discovered a basalt stele with inscriptions in Aramaic.
They were able to read on the 9th line, which is here, the Kingdom of David. This had a worldwide impact. For the first time, we had written evidence from the time of the First Temple, which clearly mentions the Kingdom of David.
The stele describes the victory of the king of Damascus over the kingdom of Israel during a battle that took place in the 9th century BCE.
The names of two kings are specifically mentioned, the king of Judea and the King of Israel. For many years, there has been a debate among scholars about the very existence of the kingdom and the existence of David. The discovery of these writings put an end to the doubts. David was a real person. He existed not only in the Bible, but also in reality.
This stele is proof that the kings of Israel were important enough to have their names carved in stone. So what were the major achievements that forged the legend of King Solomon's dynasty?
I have built you a glorious temple where you can live forever.
According to the Bible, it was in Jerusalem, the heart of the kingdom, that Solomon's splendor shone most brightly. The great king covered his capital with palaces, but above all, he gave it its first temple, the place in which all Hebrews could go to pray.
From the time of Solomon, we have very detailed account of his building activities in Jerusalem. The palace is described in a detailed way, and then the temple is described in 3 chapters. There are 5 components in these temples. In front of them, there are 2 pillars. Then the temple itself is divided into 3 units. Fourth court, holy, and then holy of holies. And the 5th component is another additional corridor that encircle the old temple.
The Bible not only describes in great detail the structure of the temple and its dimensions, but also gives precise indications of its interior decoration, with walls covered in gold and wooden panels made of cedar of Lebanon. At the back of the temple is the Holy of Holies. This is where Solomon put the Ark of the Covenant, containing the tablets of the law given by God to Moses and protected by 2 sphinxes.
At the very heart of this most sacred place, the Holy of Holies, is the Ark of the Covenant. The purpose of this object, of the Ark, is to embody, to symbolize the divine presence.
By building the temple to house the Ark of the Covenant, Solomon unified his kingdom under the protection of a single God. Today's archaeologists have been able to confirm that a temple dedicated to this God existed in Jerusalem under Solomon's reign.
Now, we don't know when this account has been written. It's even possible that it was written in the 7th century, 300 years or 400 years after the construction of the building. But the building was still standing in Jerusalem, and people were able to look at it. But the original structure, I'm sure it was from the time of Solomon.
There is no reason to doubt that the temple in Jerusalem was either built or expanded by the founders of the Davidic dynasty. And why am I saying this? For the simple reason that in the tradition of the ancient Near East, every city-state and then every territorial kingdom had a capital, and in the capital there was always a temple and a palace.
Jerusalem was the capital, so it's pretty obvious that there was a temple there. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to carry out archaeological digs today in Jerusalem.
Archaeologists are faced with a major problem. It's impossible to carry out excavations to look for traces of this first temple, which is located in the most sensitive part of Jerusalem, Temple Mount. Located to the east of the Old City, Temple Mount is also called the Esplanade of the Mosques, because it houses the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, which are among the holiest places for Muslims.
To look for the first temple, we have to go up to Temple Mount. But Temple Mount is out of bound, and there are no excavations there.
We don't have a lot of remains from that time. There's very little concrete archaeological information about the exact location of the temple and its exact dimensions. But we have the biblical data, which are totally consistent with what we can assume to be the historical reality.
If it's impossible to find traces of this first temple, it's also because Jerusalem had an extremely turbulent history and was highly coveted. "400 years after the construction of the first temple, Jerusalem experienced a tragic event. In 586 BCE, the powerful king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar II, pillaged the city.
Wherever you excavate, you find remains from this moment. from the large city and its destruction by the Babylonians at 586. And the Babylonian destruction was a little bit selective. They are targeting important buildings. And so there is good reasons to think that they destroyed the temple, the biggest symbol.
People have long sought to know what the first temple built by Solomon looked like. Was it faithful to the descriptions in the Bible? Its appearance was a total mystery, until an exceptional discovery completely reshuffled the cards. It all started in 1993, during the construction of a highway. The work unearthed ruins in Tel Motza, about 10 kilometers west of Jerusalem. Archaeologists were immediately sent to the spot. Shua Kiselevitz is co-directing the excavations at this totally improbable site, nestled under a dual carriageway.
Really, the key to understanding the site is all about these silos. We found 5 silos, and they were used to store grain. And this is dated to the 10th century BCE. So this is really the very beginning of Judah and what would evolve to become the kingdom of Judah. So this is the beginning. This is how it starts.
Over the course of the excavations, the archaeologists have discovered the ruins of a much larger construction. It reveals that the people of Tel Motza were not just farmers.
Once they became a more prosperous community and they had a prosperous site, they built a building, which was the house of the god, in the middle of the site. They literally placed their god in the middle of the industry so that he would protect them.
This is the first time in Israel that the remains of a temple from Solomon's time have been unearthed. A crucial discovery that has turned archaeological research upside down.
We know very little of this temple. We just started to uncover this temple. We can say that it's probably from the 10th century BC, so really the very, very beginning of the formation of the community that will then become part of the Judeite kingdom.
The archaeologists decided to compare the description of Solomon's temple with the Bible to the one found here in Tel Motza. Their hunch was right. Similarities have appeared.
One of the key elements that the biblical text describes are the 2 columns at the entrance to the temple. So Motza, exactly the same plan. And I can show you one of our column bases. Very nice, large stone column base. And imagine the column that was standing on top of it. So this would have been on the right-hand side, and then on the left-hand side, you would have had another one raising, and really as you entered the temple.
Although the dimensions of this temple differ slightly from those of the Temple of Solomon described in the Bible, the similarities are uncanny.
What's really interesting about this site is that it is built according to the same plan that the temple in Jerusalem, the Solomonic temple, was built. And this is why I say excavating the temple at Motza is the closest we'll ever get to excavating the temple in Jerusalem. What the Bible is telling us, we can now see physically in archaeology.
Will this discovery finally allow us to know what Solomon's temple looked like? At Tel Aviv University, archaeologist Shua Kiselevitz is working with architect Roy Albag to recreate the Temple of Tel Motza in 3 dimensions using photogrammetry.
It stops right there. So if you make the link with the reconstruction, the temple will rise up.
Game of Thrones meets Tel Motza temple. Very nice.
Thanks to thousands of drone plans reconstructed in 3D, we can clearly see the structure of the Temple of Tel Motza.
Here we have the altar right in front of the entrance to the building. Roy's working on the base of the column, which is on the excavation site.
From this highly precise data, Roy is able to model the temple in 3 dimensions.
This is the first phase of the temple. You can see the altar here and the entrance with a ramp and 2 columns on the sides.
The Holy of Holies would be here.
Yeah, here.
So if we go back to the isometric reconstruction, so from the altar through the entrance to the back. So this is where you would have the representation of the gods. In the temple in Jerusalem, it was the ark.
Roy Albag is working on the reconstruction of Solomon's temple with researchers from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
We keep on talking about the similarity between the temple at Motza and the temple in Jerusalem. But whereas the temple in Jerusalem is only known from the biblical text, in Motza we're actually taking an existing building.
Tel Motza has not only given us architectural elements from the first temple, but is also telling us how people worshipped during Solomon's time.
Then the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep.
Return to the Tel Motza site. It's difficult for the uninitiated to see the structure of the temple because the site is protected by tarpaulins, pending the resumption of excavations. But Shua Kiselevitz is keen to show us the altar where some incredible discoveries have been made.
So I'm standing at the entrance to the temple. So this is where you'd come in, and then the temple is behind me. The most important thing was the altar. And the altar is where animal sacrifices were made. They were asking to be safe, to be healthy, to be productive.
Around this altar, archaeologists have found the remains of charred animals. In the time of Solomon, sacrifices were made to curry favor with the deity, to whom ritual objects were also offered.
Really not at all. Yes, this is very, very...
Some have been exhumed near the Tel Motza altar and sent to Tel Aviv University for analysis.
So this is very, very clearly a horse.
Believers offered all kinds of figurines representing animals or humans.
So these guys are very unusual because in the southern Levant, that is the area of Israel and Judah, when we find figurines, they're not found in the cultic context. So I think these are offerings brought to the god. Even though we don't have the temple in Jerusalem, this would have been much the same assemblage that we'd find in the temple in Jerusalem.
Sacrifices were common at this time. They were made in all the temples in the region.
In the ancient Near East, gods were perceived as a physical entity. You built them a house and you had to give them food and water and gifts, etc.
In future excavations, Shua Kiselevitz hopes to find the holiest part of the temple, the Holy of Holies, which has yet to be unearthed. After millennia of wondering, we will finally know what Solomon's temple, the object of so much speculation, looked like.
Here is the labor force King Solomon raised to build Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer.
According to the Bible, Solomon didn't just build the first temple in Jerusalem. He was also a great builder who fortified many cities in his kingdom.
The Bible says that Solomon was active in several projects of construction. In Jerusalem, maybe in the vicinity, some other places, and then it says, and Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer.
Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, named in the Bible, are very old cities which already existed more than 4,000 years ago.
Most of the cities that you have here in ancient Israel, they started as the Canaanite cities, and that's why we have the phenomena of Fetel. That you have in the same site cities, 5, 10, 20 cities built one on top of the other. And of course, when Solomon built new cities, in a way he renovated, deserted old cities.
Megiddo, 90 kilometers north of Jerusalem, is one of the 3 cities that the Bible names with precision. It has obviously attracted archaeologists looking for evidence of the existence of Solomon's kingdom and his power.
Megiddo has been excavated by 4, I think, expeditions starting in the beginning of the 20th century. They were looking for King Solomon always in the traditional way by identifying, certain verses in the Bibles.
Naama Walzer from Tel Aviv University is also carrying out research in Megiddo.
We're just entering the 6-chamber gate at the entrance of Tel Megiddo. These gates, for many decades, they were associated with King Solomon. This type of gate was referred to as Solomonic gates when they were found in other sites as well.
These gates, which are distinctive in being connected to one another in a row, have been found on the sites of Hazor and Gezer, the two other cities mentioned in the Bible.
The biblical text says King Solomon was this great builder. And then they found this. They thought it was this big eureka moment.
Because of their architectural similarities, archaeologists thought they'd found the ultimate proof that Solomon had indeed fortified these cities. Until science became involved in the early 2000s.
The big revolution was the decision to go to radiocarbon dating of the layers, and then this revealed that we were all wrong.
Today, archaeologists no longer work Bible in hand when searching for the lost cities of the kings of Israel. Each stratum of an excavation site is now placed in time, using radiocarbon dating to determine its exact age. Although the Bible describes Solomon as a great builder, there are far too few remains left to prove it. The authors of the Bible were probably inspired by the time in which they lived when describing Solomon's reign 300 years previously.
If the text is later by several centuries from the actual events, so then there's big question mark whether it really reflects the reality of the time of King Solomon or, to differ, the reality of the time of the authors.
To find out more, we've gone back to Megiddo with archaeologist Tel Motza. She's going to help us to shed some light on the mythical King Solomon, who, according to the Bible, owned 12,000 horses.
So here we are in these stables over in the southern part of the site. There was a horse expert that came and it was measured, and at some point I think even a horse was here physically. So even the spacing, everything fits nicely to hold horses here.
These stables could accommodate 150 horses. There was vast open space next to the stables where the riders could train their mounts. The Bible says that Solomon had 1,400 chariots. But once again, radiocarbon dating dealt a fatal blow to the historical accuracy of the biblical account.
And again, there's no way stratigraphically to date these to the 10th century. So even though the biblical narrative of King Solomon the builder and the one with the chariots and the stables and the horses, we have it, but not in the 10th century. So there's no way to connect it to King Solomon.
Ancient texts from the Near East tell us of the Israeli horsemen's skill in driving chariots. But these testimonies date from a century or two after the reign of Solomon.
It doesn't mean the whole Bible is wrong. It doesn't mean everything is fake. Some things are expanded, some things are true. And again, we have to remember who wrote the Bible. They want a nice history as well. They want to tell about their ancestors who had horses and palaces. It's not nice to say, you know, my founding father had a tent and 2 camels.
For most archaeologists, Solomon's kingdom was far less extensive than that depicted in the Bible.
In the beginning, Judah was still very limited in scope, in territory, and Jerusalem ruled over part of the southern highlands, not much more than that. We are dealing with a small kingdom, so the whole description of Solomon as a great builder is probably a reflection of later times.
But Judah, it was like Switzerland, you know, it was high in the mountains, nobody cared about it too much, and they managed to be independent for about 400 years.
The kingdom of Solomon would therefore have occupied the southernmost part of the current state of Israel, an arid region not conducive to agriculture, but which had other considerable riches.
All these objects for the temple of the Lord were of burnished bronze.
We have traditions about King Solomon using an enormous amount of copper for building the temple and the columns. Now the question, where he got this copper?
In the time of Solomon, copper was an extremely sought-after material, as it was used to make bronze tools and weapons. The Bible tells us that Solomon had huge reserves of copper, but it remains very vague about the origin of the ore. Nothing in the biblical text indicates that Solomon controlled any mines. However, the myth of King Solomon's mines grew with the publication of the eponymous novel by Henry Rider Haggard in 1885. Archaeologists have been looking for these famous copper mines since the 1930s. The first mines they found were near Aqaba, followed by Kirbat and Nahas in southern Jordan. But neither had any conclusive link with King Solomon. But their intuition was right. It was in the Negev desert, in the heart of the Timna Valley, that archaeologist Erez Ben Yosef made a fantastic discovery. In this arid region, with its rocks eroded by the winds, the archaeologist found a site with a highly evocative name, Slaves Hill.
Slaves Hill is one of the largest smelting camps in Timna Valley. We have 10 camps like that. We now know all dated to the 10th century BCE. Some of them started earlier, some of them continued after the period of King Solomon, and they are telling a story of about 400 years of activity in Timna Valley.
But before he takes us to see Slaves Hill, Erez reveals the history of these mines, which is literally written on the rock.
This is the Hathor temple. It's a very famous site in Timna. It was found in 1969, and it was quite amazing. It was full of artifacts, including a statue of the goddess Hathor.
The Egyptian goddess of fertility, Hathor, depicted in the hieroglyph carved into the rock, was also the patron goddess of miners.
And since this discovery, the researchers thought that the mines here are only from this period of the Egyptian. This is when we started to find new sites and new dating, and we understood that the Egyptians was only a small part of a much bigger story. Later on, also the Israelites joined the picture, probably at the time of King David and his son King Solomon.
After the Egyptians left the region, the mines were not abandoned as archaeologists had long thought. On the contrary, the production of copper developed in an astonishing way. It's hard to believe that people could have lived in such an inhospitable region without vegetation or water. The Timna Valley, on the other hand, is full of copper ore that had to be fetched from the bowels of the rock.
We are inside one of the copper mines of Timna, one of the tunnels that were, following the copper veins. On the rock here, this blue and green color, these are the minerals. Everything we see here was dug by people 3,000 years ago.
3,000 years ago. In other words, the 10th century BCE. Has Erez Ben Yosef finally found the exact location of King Solomon's mines?
You can say that we are in King Solomon's mines. We have fantastic dates from radiocarbon samples, and these are all showing that the most intense activity here was at the time of King Solomon, about 3,000 years ago. Talk about hundreds, if not thousands of people working in the Timna Valley.
According to the Bible, Solomon enslaved the peoples he conquered. We have to imagine these galleries echoing with chisel blows and swarming with workers condemned to forced labor. Producing copper at the time brought incalculable wealth.
Copper at that time was used for weapons. It was like oil of today. The people that had control over this industry had access to very important stuff to win wars. This was used also as ornaments and also in cultic places, the most famous of which is, of course, the temple. Solomon used huge amount of copper for the walls, for the pillars.
Once extracted from these tunnels, which were several hundred meters long, the rock containing the ore was carried by donkey to the top of the famous Slaves' Hill to be smelted. Why did they choose to place the foundries high up in a fortified area so far from the galleries?
This is the gatehouse to this smelting site. You can see the basis here of a tower. There was another tower on the other side of the gate, and we have a wall. So in addition to the cliffs of the hill, they were also protecting themselves with a wall.
Proof that it was necessary to protect the copper, a very precious metal, from covetous intentions? Slaves' Hill was a fortress perched on top of a rocky plateau, a citadel which contained King Solomon's wealth.
Slaves' Hill is a huge copper production site. We have here hundreds of tons of slag, the waste of furnaces, of the smelting process.
The furnaces have disappeared because they were made of clay. To extract the copper, the rock was heated in clay urns, which were smashed to recover the ore, which would have become liquid. Today, only the slag remains.
This slag, we are sure it's 3,000 years ago. It's like exactly from the time of King David and Solomon. There is no question about that.
Who were the miners who provided King Solomon with this precious copper?
At that time, in this region, we know that the Edomites were living here. The biblical story tells us that at the time of King David, he conquered the Edomites. And also in the period of his son Solomon, the Edomites were still subjugated to Jerusalem.
Solomon forced the people under his control to work for him. The Edomites could very well have been reduced to slavery or paid tributes to him.
The Edomites were still nomads at that time period. They didn't build cities. Nomads leave very little behind. Nomads live in tents. They don't produce much waste. They go from one place to the other, so usually we don't know about them in the archaeological record.
Here in the Negev, a real miracle has taken place. The arid climate has preserved intact precious clues to the nomadic societies that lived in the time of Solomon.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Yes.
It's a great piece. It might be clothes. It might be some clothing.
The heat and the dryness have frozen in time fibers of wool and linen, pieces of rope and leather that have been waiting for 3,000 years to reveal their secrets. These precious relics were sent for analysis to the laboratory of the Israel Antiquities Authority and entrusted to chemist Naama Sukenik.
You have to understand that all these objects are very rare. They aren't usually found in archaeological digs as they decompose very quickly.
Radiocarbon dating has confirmed that these textiles were indeed made more than 3,000 years ago.
It's the first time that we found objects that can tell us what was happening in the Iron Age at the time of David and Solomon. We found textiles, ropes and leather there, which have not only given us the opportunity to reconstruct the wardrobe of the people of Timna, but to discover how they lived on a daily basis.
Even more surprising, some of the textiles were dyed in bright colors. Colors that show great wealth. It's easy to imagine that Solomon sent powerful emissaries to inspect the work in the mines, who wore colorful clothes. Naama Sukenik has been particularly interested in those dyed purple, because they are very rare.
The color purple is the most expensive color that existed in antiquity. And in some eras, it was even more expensive than gold. The main reason for this is the way the dye was obtained. It was a very difficult and complex process.
The color purple comes from the gland of a mollusk living in the Mediterranean. Enormous quantities of this small sea snail were needed to produce enough dye.
It's a color that only people of higher social classes, the elite or kings, could afford because of its very high price.
A fresco found in a synagogue in Syria shows a man wearing a purple toga. This man is David, the father of Solomon. The artist wanted to symbolize the omnipotence of the kings of Israel.
We can see that Timnan's society was complex and hierarchical, with different social classes. On the one hand, there were workers subjected to forced labor, but there was also an elite. These upper social classes could, like David and Solomon, afford to eat high-quality food, imported from the shores of the Mediterranean, and wear luxurious clothing.
Who could have predicted that a simple piece of fabric found in the Negev desert could open up so many possibilities? Although some questions remain unanswered, one thing is certain. In the time of Solomon, this region was prosperous, and these fabrics are the proof. 3,000 years ago, copper production was in full swing. Was it used by Solomon as a bargaining chip to attract the most powerful sovereigns to his court, including the legendary Queen of Sheba?
She arrived in Jerusalem with a very great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones.
The meeting between the powerful King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba is one of the most famous episodes in the Bible. It relates how this monarch from the east reigned over a rich kingdom which extended from Yemen to Ethiopia. To find out more, we meet up with David Shapira at the Ethiopian Church of Jerusalem.
What we know from the text, and by the text I mean the biblical text, is that the Queen of Sheba is intrigued by King Solomon's greatness and wisdom. She wants to meet this man whose reputation has spread far and wide.
The Bible tells that the Queen of Sheba arrived with a caravan of camels laden with spices, gold, and precious stones. Solomon, in return, received her with great pomp.
It is a description of commercial relationship between Judah and South Arabia, the period of the domination of the Assyrian Empire in the late 8th and 7th centuries BC.
But this is one of the exotic things, you know, how you present an important king. Very clever, very rich, and international connections.
The meeting is certainly worthy of a story from 1001 Nights. But it stops there. How did this story survive the centuries?
There is a version in the Ethiopian tradition dating from the 4th century CE, which tells us that Solomon is dazzled by the beauty of the Queen of Sheba and falls in love with her. Only Solomon is a king, and the Queen of Sheba is a queen. She is entitled to all the respect due to a great princess. So Solomon uses subterfuge. He welcomes the Queen of Sheba and tells her, "My whole palace is yours. I'll give you hospitality. I'll give you lodging and meals. I ask only one thing. Do not take anything from my palace without my permission. If you don't ask my permission, I will permit myself to spend the night with you." And with these wise words, King Solomon runs into the palace kitchens and asks the cook to add a lot of salt to the dishes. Dinner takes place, the Queen of Sheba is welcomed, and everyone returns to their apartments. The Queen of Sheba falls asleep around midnight, and around 3 in the morning she wakes up. She's thirsty. There's no running water in King Solomon's palace, so she comes out of her room, and in the corridor she sees a jug of water. She's very thirsty. She takes the jug and drinks the water. But hiding behind the pillars is Solomon, who has been patiently waiting for this to happen. And when the Queen of Sheba drinks the water from the jug without his permission, he comes out of his hiding place and says, "I warned you not to touch anything in my palace without my permission." The night takes its course, and sometime later, she becomes pregnant with Menelik, who will found the Empire of Ethiopia.
According to Ethiopian tradition, Solomon is therefore behind another powerful dynasty, that of the Ethiopian emperors.
It's the cornerstone of this nation, which lays claim to this union between the most powerful king of his time, King Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba. Why? Because everyone wants to be descended from a king and a queen.
The Bible doesn't speak of a carnal union between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, and yet it dwells at length on the sovereign's love life, with his 700 wives and 300 concubines, a sexual appetite that would cause his downfall.
He begins to sin with foreign women, to have relationships, and he falls into idolatry.
In order to please them, he gives in to all their whims and has temples built for foreign deities. God, who has asked him to erect a temple for him, is furious and punishes him.
In chapter 11 in the first book of Kings, Solomon is described in a negative way. The text tells you that he was an apostate, basically. The God of Israel decided to break the great united monarchy into two.
It was the end of Solomon's greatness. After a reign spanning 40 years, he died. According to the Book of Kings, his son Rehoboam was unable to maintain the unity of the kingdom of Israel, which split in two. The story could have ended with this failure, and Solomon could have disappeared from the collective memory. But yet, his legend would come down through the centuries. Why?
David and Solomon became such an icon that everybody wants to be a continuation of David and Solomon. This is the legitimacy of the dynasty. And the founded fathers of the dynasty are very important because they give the authority to all the other kings.
The kings are not the only ones to claim lineal descent from Solomon. The Christians would also take him as a model.
You will conceive a son, and you are to call him Jesus. The Lord God will give him the throne of David.
In the New Testament, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke relate that Jesus is descended from a prestigious line, that of David, the father of Solomon.
The kings of Israel became important because of the tradition making the linkage between the lineage of David and Jesus. This is beautifully described in the tree of Jesse.
The tree of Jesse represents the family tree of Jesus Christ. It starts with Jesse, the father of David, and rises up through Solomon to Jesus.
Christianity inherits all the Jewish traditions.
During the Middle Ages in the West, the tree of Jesse will become a recurring motif and adorn the porches and stained glass windows of cathedrals. Although the figures depicted vary from one tree to another, they always include David and Solomon.
You know, once you have Judaism and the Bible, and then it has been adopted by Christianity, and Christianity developed and spread all over the world, every Christian has some relationship to David.
In turn, the Western kings will claim descent from David and Solomon. They will make it possible to legitimize kings by divine right.
All the big monarchs and kingdoms of Europe, the Ottonians in Germany and the Franks, of course, and the British kings as well, they all have some sort of traditional links with the memory of the great kings.
Solomon thus appears on the crown of the Holy Roman Empire kept in the imperial treasury in Vienna. Even today, the three religions of the book claim this mythical heritage of the kings of Israel. David and Solomon appear in the Old and New Testaments and in the Quran, where they appear under the names of Dawood and Suleiman. Solomon remains forever the symbol of the perfect monarch, a model of universal probity.